right, welcome back to another edition of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast. We bring you today's labor news, history, and analysis from the U.S. and around the world. This is a podcast you listen to with your fellow workers organizing on the shop floor. This is a podcast you listen to before walking into your union meeting. As always, I'm Rico Rutia, here with my co-host, Brian Pfeiffer. We cover a lot of ground in today's episode. As always, we'll kick things off with reports on labor for Palestine. We'll also offer updates on the Teamsters strike in Texas, the UAW in Kentucky, Starbucks workers unionizing in 21 locations, Twin City nursing home workers, a general strike in Guinea, West Africa, and a look ahead for labor as far as strikes in the 2024 elections. Also, tonight, Brian and I celebrate the recording of our 75th episode. And what led us to starting this podcast was that a few years ago, at the People's Power Summit in Wisconsin, Brian, Jerry, and I were having a casual conversation about the history of the Salvadoran labor movement. And soon enough, we got a little crowd around us just listening, checking out what we were talking about. And Brian, Jerry, and I just figured, that's the kind of conversation we have anyway. So why not give it a little structure, a little experimentation, record it, and see what happens. And that's what you're listening to now. And to date, we've done some interviews that we're incredibly proud of and excited by. We've done shows that focus on strike preparation, labor history, war, genocide, International Workers' Day, Black History Month, anti-fascism, and a variety of other topics. Also, union democracy comes to mind. But I should also mention that one thing we've always enjoyed doing is sharing some culture at the very beginning of our show. And tonight I would like to offer both a song and a poem. I'm going to start with the poem. The poem is by Roque Dalton, one of the most famous poets from El Salvador, where my family is from. I'll first read it in Spanish, then translate it to English. And mind you, the translation is going to be a little bit crude, but you'll get the idea. It's very short. In Spanish, it goes like this. Ahora es la hora de mi turno, el turno del ofendido, por años silenciosos, a pesar de los gritos. And the English translation would go more or less as follows. Now is the hour of my turn, the turn of the offended, for years in silence, despite the screams. Again, you always lose a little something in translation, but you get the idea. Tonight's song is by a group called Los Guaraguaos, a Venezuelan group from the 1970s. Los Guaraguaos are known all throughout Latin America and even more specifically within Latin American social movements because their music is all about social justice and anti-imperialism. As far as Latin American protest music goes, I put them up there right next to Ali Primera, Victor Jara, and Inti Illimani. I also love their bassist, Jesus Cordero, and how the bass is so clearly audible in their music. The song is called Los Estudiantes, or The Students. Its lyrics celebrate the bravery of students in social struggles, as well as the different things they study. So they give a shout out to astronomy, to literature, to experimentation, and I love that. I love learning, and I'm not embarrassed to say it. It's fun, it's stimulating, it's cool, it's what makes me feel human. So here's a shout out to learning, to you peeps, and to Los Guaraguaos, of course.
Que vivan los estudiantes, jardín de nuestra alegría. Son aves que no se asustan de animal ni policía. Y no le asustan las balas ni el ladrar de la jauría. Caramba y zamba la cosa, que viva la astronomía. Caramba y zamba la cosa, que viva la astronomía. Me gustan los estudiantes que rugen como los vientos cuando le meten al oído sotanas y regimientos, pajarillos libertarios igual que los elementos. Caramba y zamba la cosa, que viva lo experimento. Caramba y zamba la cosa, que viva lo experimento. Me gustan los estudiantes porque levantan el pecho y samba la cosa, viva la literatura. Que vivan los estudiantes, jardín de nuestra alegría. Son aves que no se asustan de animal ni policía. Y no le asustan las balas ni el ladrar de la jauría. Caramba y samba la cosa, que viva la astronomía. Caramba y samba la cosa, que viva la astronomía. Caramba y samba la cosa, que viva la astronomía. Caramba y samba la cosa, que viva la...
Activists hold State House die-in over Gaza, protest subsidies to General Dynamics, reports Maine Labor for Palestine. Maine Labor for Palestine is a working group composed of Maine rank-and-file union members and union staffers. They're calling on Maine unions to stand in solidarity with the people of Gaza and Palestine generally. From apartheid South Africa to the civil rights movement here in the United States, the labor movement has a rich history of standing with oppressed peoples. Union members have marched, boycotted, and pressured elected officials to dismantle systems of oppression. Now is the time that we organize and mobilize to end Israel's genocide against Palestinians. Here in the United States, the labor movement has a unique opportunity to pressure local and global economies as well as our elected officials. That was a statement by Maine Labor for Palestine. And as we've been doing every week here, listeners, we're starting off the podcast, this episode, again with information of union workers, but also unorganized workers on the actions they're doing to support Palestine and oppose the U.S.-Israeli genocide. This information we get mostly from laborforpalestine.net. That's laborforpalestine.net. So we kicked it off here with Maine. Very important actions going on out there. Tomorrow, the International Day for Palestinian Journalists will happen. That's February 26th, everywhere in the world. The Palestinian Journalists Syndicate say, let's mobilize. They're asking journalists and other media workers to send photos, videos, documents published during February 26th to the Communications Department at PJS, the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate. That can be sent to Rania, R-A-N-I-A, at pjs.ps, and they will be shared through their website. And the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate put out a short statement, and it says, in part, over 120 journalists have been killed by Israel with the U.S. backing in various locations in Palestine. 4 months after the start of the genocide in Gaza, the PJS highly appreciates the mobilization and support received by free people around the world, represented in different bodies, which has a clear impact in supporting Palestinian journalists, knowing that they are not alone, and started to mobilize international community and taking actions towards the genocide taking place in Gaza. So that's tomorrow, listeners, International Day of Action to support Palestinian journalists and also others who have been murdered by the U.S. and Israel and Gaza and throughout Palestine. The next International Day of Solidarity with Palestine is going to be March 2nd. There will be actions happening worldwide. That's International Day of Solidarity with Palestine, March 2nd. There will be actions in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I'm based in Wisconsin out of, as well as all across the United States and worldwide. A listing of events can be found at shutitdownforpalestine.org. That's shutitdownforpalestine.org. And you can find events there. And if you organize a protest in your area, feel free to send it there and they will post it for you as well. And of course, every year here, we're excited to announce that again, of course, this year, March 8th, International Working Women's Day. German communist Clara Zetkin, a co-founder of International Women's Day, once said, quote, "For reforms ameliorate the situation of the working class, they lighten the weight of the chains labor is burdened with by capitalism, but they are not sufficient to crush capitalism and to emancipate the workers from their tyranny," end quote. Again, this year, creative actions are being planned across the U.S. and internationally, raising up, of course, Palestine and many other very, very important struggles internationally, as well as in specific actions and issues in various cities. A conference for the entire movement, Decolonization and the Fight Against Imperialism, will be happening in St. Paul, Minnesota, April 5th to the 7th, 2024. And this is being sponsored by the United National Anti-War Coalition. They put out a statement for their conference that says, in part, quote, "As we have seen the horrific events in Gaza and the imperialist debacle in Ukraine, the U.S. pushes ahead with threats aimed at China and any country that will not accept its domination. The U.S. is expanding the war in the Middle East with bombing in Yemen, Iraq, and Syria. Now is the time for us to come together as a movement to assess the period we are in and plan for the future. Join us at the Intercontinental St. Paul Riverfront Hotel, located at East Kellogg Boulevard in St. Paul, April 5 to 7, 2024. Organizations from across the country and international guests will be participating." And listeners, more information is available at unacconference2024.org. That's UNACconference2024.org. Look for the registration there, and there's more information as well as a longer statement that listeners can check out. All right, Rick is going to talk to us about striking Teamsters next.
That's right. This is a follow-up from last week's story about Molson Coors. This story is coming from CNN.com, and it reads as follows. And there's one piece that I really want to touch on, and it's towards the end of the article. The article reads as follows. More than 400 Teamsters are on strike at the Molson Coors Brewery in Fort Worth, Texas, impacting production for North America's second largest brewer. The work stoppage, which began Saturday, comes ahead of the March 1st strike deadline that the Teamsters have set for the 5,000 members at Anheuser-Busch, the nation's largest brewer. In its most recent statement on the state of those talks, the union said a strike at Anheuser-Busch appears unavoidable. The Molson Coors strike comes as the company has been reporting strong sales and profits. Last week, it reported underlying earnings of $1.5 billion before taxes for 2023, up 39% from a year earlier. Full-year revenue rose 9% to $11.7 billion. Last year, this is a quote, "Last year, we achieved the highest reported top and bottom line figures in the history of our company," said CEO Gavin Hattersley when reporting results. And the quote continues, "We plan to build on this momentum in 2024. Molson Coors said about 30% of its North American workforce is unionized, but much of that is the workers at 3 Canadian breweries. In addition to those 3 facilities, it operates 6 breweries in the U.S., including Fort Worth. The company said it has excess capacity at its other 5 breweries and that it built up inventory of its product ahead of the possible strike." And it continues with the quote, "While we respect the union's right to strike, we have a strong contingency plan and we are well equipped to ensure consumers will be able to buy their favorite Molson Coors products," unquote, said the company's statement. It defended its offer to the union, which said exceeds local market rates. Now, I wanted to focus on that that part that I stressed earlier. The company said that it has excess capacity at its other 5 U.S. breweries and that it built up inventory of its product ahead of the possible strike. While we respect the union's right to strike, we have a strong contingency plan. That part, I wanted to focus on that part because we talk about that on here sometimes. And we've talked about how to carry out strikes and organize worker actions and stuff like that. And this is part of what I wanted to say tonight and what we've been saying all along is, the boss has a contingency plan. The boss is thinking 5 steps ahead, so do we, so do our unions, just standing on the picket line. Yes, that is combative. That is struggle. That is worthy of solidarity. That is building a movement. That is fighting back. That is all of those things and more. But what else do we have? What's plan B, C, D, E, F to coincide along with that? And I'm only mentioning that because here we are reading an article from CNN that tells us very explicitly that the bosses do have these strong contingency plans. And we also saw that with the railway strike in 2022. The bosses, they had contingency plans. Other vendors, other capitalists, they have contingency plans. What is plan B, C, D, E, F, G for us, the working people, unionized people, organized people when we're going on strike. So all that to highlight that portion of the article and also update everyone on what's happening with the Teamsters at Molson Coors in Fort Worth, because we started covering them last week. Another update that I would like to update everyone on is the Ford UAW negotiations. So I came across an article on CNBC, and we also talked about this last week. The article, the headline reads as follows: Ford UAW reached local labor deal to avert strike at Kentucky plant. Ford and a United Auto Workers local union, UAW Local 62, reached a tentative deal on Wednesday to avert a strike at the automaker's most profitable plant. The UAW had threatened that nearly 9,000 workers at Ford's Kentucky truck plant would strike on Friday if local union demands were not resolved. The UAW said Tuesday that the deal addresses local issues related to skilled trades, ergonomics, and health and safety. And we talked about ergonomics and health and safety in last week's episode. Ford said in a statement that it was, quote, pleased to have reached a tentative agreement, unquote. The Louisville plant is Ford's largest in terms of employment and revenue. Workers at the plant produce Ford Super Duty pickups as well as Ford Expeditions and the Lincoln Navigator SUVs. Dozens of local contracts across the big three automakers, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, remain in negotiations, according to the UAW. Local contracts differ from the national agreement that the UAW ratified in late 2023 and deal with plant-specific issues. Now, I wanted to highlight the part that says dozens of local contracts across the big three automakers, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, remain in negotiations, according to the UAW. My theory, and this could be based just on reading this article, but really, my theory is this. I think this was the largest plant, and if those 9,000 workers would have gone on strike, I think it would have emboldened all the other workers that are struggling to settle the contract, all the other dozens of plants that are trying to negotiate dozens of local contracts. I think they would have been emboldened, and I think that Ford knew that the UAW wasn't bluffing because they just carried out the strike in 2023. So hats off. I hope the UAW members at this plant got the contract that they wanted, but also just wanted to use this article to make a couple of those points. Up next, Brian, he's going to be reporting about Starbucks workers organizing at 21 shops. What's up with that?
All right, Rick. Our friends and fellow workers at 21 more Starbucks stores nationwide announced unionization efforts. They dropped their petitions last week at 21 Starbucks locations around the country. In addition to 2 Colorado locations, Rick is based in Colorado, stores in Arkansas, California, Illinois, Louisiana, North Dakota, New York, Nevada, Ohio, Texas, Utah, Virginia, Washington, and Wisconsin announced unionization efforts last Tuesday. In total, the union says 396 other stores have moved forward with unionization. Starbucks Workers United statement said, Starbucks has made a habit of prioritizing sales and profits over worker safety. We have worked through violent threats from customers, unsafe weather conditions, and a global pandemic, said the Starbucks Workers United. Despite our willingness to work regardless of this disregard for our health and safety, we've been met with higher and higher expectations without being given the resources to meet them. So the workers at Starbucks stores are on the move from one end of the country to the other, and we would ask our listeners to support those workers engaging in very creative actions and courageous actions, from strikes to dropping petitions to voting to unionize to doing various different community actions. And it's a very exciting time for those workers, and they need as much help as we can possibly give them. So more information is at Starbucks Workers United social media and Facebook page. And we wish them well and send them all of our solidarity here from We Rise Fighting. All right, Rick, you're going to talk to us about Guinea.
That's right. And indeed, that Starbucks struggle is really inspiring. You know, nothing like seeing young people with all different types of identities and new ideas coming into the labor movement and, you know, rattling things up for corporations like Starbucks. So thank you for reporting on that. Yes, as you mentioned, up next is news from Guinea, West Africa. This comes from barons.com. The headline reads as follows: Guinea unions call general strike starting Monday. Now, we report this because we report on international affairs on this show. We see the union movement, the labor movement, the workers' struggle as being an international struggle. So it's helpful to look at other labor movements and see what they do, learn from them, connect with them, build with them, struggle with them. And on this one occasion, I came across this article about a general strike in Guinea. And I wanted to talk about that because obviously it's interesting, general strike, but it also lets us talk about other things. Like, for instance, we on this show had talked about a general strike by Palestinian workers long before October 7th. And that's important to note because general strikes, protests, demonstrations, social unrest like that of that nature is a symptom that, the pressure cooker in a nation might be building. So, yeah, it's important to keep our ear to the ground and see exactly where other nations are at and see if we can connect with them and stay informed. And this is why we're reporting on this. So, Guinea unions call general strike starting Monday. The article reads as follows: Guinea trade unions Thursday announced an unlimited general strike next week to demand the release of a press unionist, a reduction in food prices, and the lifting of internet restrictions. Also going to highlight those things: the release of a press unionist, the reduction in food prices, and for the lifting of internet restrictions. When I say that we can learn from other labor movements, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Here in the US, we don't make those types of demands. We don't demand the release of a trade unionist or press unionist or anything like that. Our unions aren't on the verge of going on strike to reduce the food prices, which a lot of working class people here could benefit, if not all working class people here could benefit from. And the lifting of internet restrictions, I can't speak to that, but that does speak to the limitless types of demands that we can make as workers. All right, the article continues. The Guinean Trade Union Movement, a confederation of the main unions, called on the public and private sectors to follow the strike across the country from Monday. The call comes as the West African nation grapples with growing social tensions and the absence of government. Guinea's ruling junta, which took power in a September 2021 coup, on Monday decreed the dissolution of the government which had been in office since July 2022. The unions are calling for the immediate and unconditional release of Sekou Jamal Pendesa, Secretary General of the Union of Press Professionals of Guinea, the SPPG, who was arrested at the end of January for quote unquote participating in an unauthorized protest. Trade unions organized a series of well-attended strikes against corruption and government interferences in the justice system in early 2007. The fierce repression of this movement under former President Lansana Conté left 186 dead, according to NGOs. Protests have become rare under junta leader General Mamadi Doumbouya. The military leaders banned all demonstrations in 2022 and have arrested a number of opposition leaders, civil society members, and the press. Under international pressure, the junta has promised to hand the reins of government back to elected civilians by the end of 2024, but the opposition has accused it of authoritarian drift. And just for the sake of anyone who may be listening and being like, wait, hold up, what's a junta? A junta is basically the convergence, the coalition of what I know from my experience in El Salvador, from growing up and being Salvadoran, is the combination of a military body and a civilian body of people who represent the nation. So it's like a junta. It's like in Spanish, it means together. So that's what that is, and that's what that means, just in case folks weren't familiar with that term. And that's why we report on that, because we have to learn from each other's labor movements, and we have to keep our ear to the ground as far as what's going on. Because then, for instance, we were reporting on Palestine months before October 7th happened. So to be completely honest, to know that things finally blew up on October 7th, that wasn't a total shock. Was it a shock? Yes, it was a shock. It's always a shock. But was it completely out of nowhere? No, because we had been following other news all along, and we had followed some of the labor unrest that was taking place in that region. Up next on news from the Twin Cities, nursing home workers, we got Brian. What's going on there, Brian?
All right, thank you, Rick. In Minneapolis and St. Paul, which is known as the Twin Cities for listeners, in Minnesota, hundreds of Twin Cities nursing home workers plan one-day strike. More to join. Care workers at 10 Minnesota nursing homes and counting are planning a one-day strike for March 5th. About 600 workers across 7 facilities first announced plans to strike last week, but that number has grown with union members voting on the work stoppage continuing. Participating nurses and support staff are hoping the temporary strike will bolster their push for increased wages, benefits, and staffing levels without creating a painfully long pause in care for the facility's residents, according to Jamie Gulley, president of SEIU Healthcare Minnesota and Iowa, which represents the striking workers. The planned strike coincides with labor advocates putting public pressure on a newly created state regulatory board in Minnesota to create a $25 minimum wage for nursing home workers. The striking workers are making similar requests of long-term care industry employers. Quote, "We need a wage that people can live on in order for people to come into the industry and stay," Gulley told McKnight's Long-Term Care News last week. Staffing and wages go hand in hand because people are working doubles, some working 20 to 30 days in a row. It's really not sustainable and has a huge toll on workers, families, and their lives, end quote by Gulley. And Rick, you mentioned safety in the strike of the UAW, and in the healthcare industry in particular, in nursing homes, safety is a central issue beyond wages and other working conditions. What's your thoughts on safety for these workers generally and as an issue that is so deep for workers beyond just the basics of wages, hours, and working conditions?
My thoughts on worker safety is the same across the board. Any industry, any company, any employer, any of those situations, work shouldn't hurt. And we shouldn't donate any part of our body towards any employer. We're just trying to make a living. We're not trying to donate the parts of our body that help us carry out our labor, stay employed, also go out and have fun and live life. Like, we're not trying to donate our limbs to any of these employers. We're not trying to donate them to the capitalist ruling class. And I think that, the place where we can really defend that right and stand on that idea and that principle is a union contract. That's where we can really seal the deal. So I think that we should support these efforts, highlight these efforts, right there next to all the other bread and butter issues, and really highlight how important health and safety and ergonomics is. Because ergonomics, as I've mentioned previously, that's something that we can talk about on the shop floor of a Ford auto plant. And it's also something that we can talk about in the cubicle of an office job, as far as the posture you maintain when you're sitting at a desk, as far as carpal tunnel related to the use of a keyboard on a computer, so it's all over the place. Injuries can happen instantaneously from an accident, or they can happen over time, and be invisible. So either way, we have to address them so that we as working class people aren't just donating our bodies and our health to some employer left broken and unemployable, and with no recourse. So that's why that's why this language is so important. And that's honestly why I wish it would make more headlines, like right next to, how quickly they talk about the $25 minimum wage in an article, and how thoroughly they talk about, the quote unquote economic consequences of stuff like that. I wish they would talk about more health and safety stuff and ergonomic stuff, and how we can defend ourselves and protect ourselves, and ergonomically correct or ergonomically friendly ways to carry out our labor that don't break our bodies. So thank you. Yeah, thank you, Brian, for bringing that up. And finally, for tonight, gonna touch on another one of those articles that I've touched on several times here on this podcast. These are articles reflecting on 2023 and how it was, quote unquote, the year of the strike. And that's actually the name of this article. This is a CNN article, and the headline reads as follows: 2023 was year of the strike. Here's what could be ahead in 2024. Now, I took out all the stuff from 2023, honestly, because I've already reported on that. We've reported on that. We've read articles and shared articles on that. So if you really want to know what happened in 2023, I encourage you to go through some of our previous episodes and check out what happened in 2023. They're there a few times. And this article didn't have anything too compellingly different from what we've already reported, but it did offer another recap of what could be ahead in 2024, which is something that I wanted to keep fresh on this show and talk about just a little bit more, and also mention that I have never seen this amount of articles talking about, of course, this major blip in strikes in the US. And to me, that also, beyond keeping us informed, also tells us that the capitalists are taking inventory. The capitalists are taking notes. The capitalists are crunching numbers. How much did that cost? How many days did that cost? How many workers were on strike? How many workers were on strike in comparison to previous years when, all was quote unquote quiet? So I think it's important for us to note that as well. Yes, they do take inventory. They do take count. After workers carry out a successful strike, yes, they do crunch the numbers and say, yo, that strike costed this much amount of money or did this type of damage. They will put it in their documents. They will put it in their documents that they submit to the Security and Exchange Commission in their quarterly reports. They'll talk about the damage done by strike and work stoppages and worker actions. We've talked about that on this very show. So, all that just to get back to this article and look forward to 2024. There's a few things happening that this article highlighted that I wanted to highlight for all of us. And it starts with Hollywood studios. Last year, overlapping strikes by more than 11,000 members of the Writers Guild of America and SAG-AFTRA, which represents about 160,000 actors working in films and shows, shut down much of Hollywood studio operations for about half the year. This year could be a sequel. IATSE, which represents 60,000 technicians, artisans, and craftspeople who perform a wide variety of non-acting and non-directing jobs for feature films, television shows, and streaming programs, has its contract expire on July 31st. Kind of a long sentence. Let me just say, IATSE, 60,000 workers, contract expiration July 31st, just to kind of recap that kind of wordy sentence. After the deals with writers and actors last year, it could be difficult reaching a deal that would satisfy the members of IATSE, who narrowly approved the last contract with just 50.3% of the rank and file voting in favor of it during a ratification vote in 2021. The article moves forward and starts talking about Boeing. Boeing has had its share of troubles for the last 5 years, but labor unrest has not been one of those problems. This could end this year. A contract covering 30,000 machinists who built the planes at its factories in Washington state is due to expire September 12th. With Boeing reporting 5 years of losses, the total exceeding $26 billion and no end in sight to the red ink, it could be difficult for the union to get the contract it wants from Boeing with the kind of large pay increases other unions have won recently. The start of negotiations on the new contract has already been pushed back by the latest quality issues at the company, which occurred when the door plug was expelled from the side of a Boeing 737 MAX 9 operated by an Air Alaska on January 5th, leaving a gaping hole in the plane. And finally, the article ends with, again, more stuff coming down the pike in 2024 with airline workers. The major U.S. airlines all agreed to deal with the pilots union last year that gave raises of 30% or more. Now, other airline unions are demanding they get rewarded as well. The Association of Professional Flight Attendants, which represents 25,000 flight attendants at American Airlines, has asked federal labor mediators to declare an impasse that could start the clock ticking towards a possible strike. Other unions representing about 50,000 other flight attendants are also involved in mediated talks with their members' airlines. And unions representing tens of thousands of other airline workers, including customer service employees, mechanics, and other ground workers, are seeking contracts as well. Labor relations in the airline industry are covered by a different labor law, the Railway Labor Act, than what covers talks at most private sector employers. There are limits on airline unions' ability to strike under the law, but union officials are hopeful that President Joe Biden will let them wield the threat of a strike as a way of getting the contract they say members deserve. Now, hold up. That very, very last line. Union officials are hopeful that President Joe Biden will let them wield the threat of a strike as a way of getting the contract they say members deserve. Yo, I wouldn't hold my breath, union officials. I don't know what union officials this poorly written article is talking about, but I don't care. Like, whoever it is better not be holding their breath, because when that railway strike was shut down, guess what act covered those railway workers? And guess what president was president during that time? And guess what the president did, along with the vast majority of Democrats in Congress? They shut down the railway strike. And we're not going to let you forget it. And we're certainly not going to let you forget that going into this election season. The more union leaders are talking about Biden and trying to gloss over the railway strike and his role in crushing the railway strike, trying to gloss over genocide, absolutely not. We will not let you forget that. You know, it's been several years now into my adulthood that I just cannot be made to feel guilty for not voting for either Democrat or Republican, because it seems as no matter whether we vote Democrat or Republican, we get Reagan either way. So this year it's going to be the same thing. I'm not carrying any guilt. And if anything, I'm looking at people who are trying to justify a vote for Joe Biden, knowing that he's funding and carrying out genocide in Gaza. Like, how are you not being held accountable for that when you're telling me to vote for this person? Same thing with the railway strike. Where does that factor in when you tell me to vote for Joe Biden because he's the lesser of the two evils, and for that reason supposedly more labor friendly? No, absolutely not. That's not going to fly. And so we have an upcoming episode that where we will talk about this stuff very explicitly and look at it very closely. We're going to talk about the 2024 elections. I had mentioned that in last week's episode, and we were hoping to get to it this week. But again, life. Will we get to it? Yep. Within the next, couple of weeks or so. Best way to stay informed, just go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. We will be coming with a unions and election, labor movement and election kind of show. It will be theoretical in its approach. And I will also be doing a separate show on how to research this type of information by looking at campaign contributions, political action committees, the Federal Elections Commission, and doing that so that we can create our own information as we're going into the 2024 elections. But again, if you want to stay up to date with our shows, go ahead and subscribe, like, share, talk about all that jazz. We appreciate it. We hope that you find these shows valuable and the content valuable. And thank you always for listening. We will come back to you next week. Love and solidarity to all, everyone. Take care.